The desert wind carried more than dust that evening. It carried the stench of whiskey and broken promises through the ramshackle buildings of Crimson Creek, Arizona. Mary Whitfield pressed her face against the grimy window of their one-room shack, watching tumbleweeds dance across the main street like ghosts of better days that never came. At 19, she'd lived through more disappointments than most folks twice her age. Her real father had died in a mine collapse when she was 7, leaving her mother desperate enough to marry the first man who'd have them. That man was Samuel Briggs, and he'd brought nothing but misery wrapped in false charm. "Mary, get your worthless hide in here," Samuel's voice boomed from the back room, slurred with drink as usual. She knew better than to delay. The floorboards creaked under her worn boots as she made her way to where Samuel sat hunched over a card table with 3 other men. The air hung thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of spilled beer. "Gentlemen," Samuel gestured grandly, nearly knocking over his glass. "Meet my stepdaughter. Pretty little thing, ain't she?" Mary's stomach turned. She recognized 2 of the men Jack Thornton ran the general store and always let his eyes linger too long when she came for supplies. The other was Marcus Webb, who dealt in commodities that decent folk didn't discuss in polite company. The third stranger wore expensive clothes that marked him as an outsider, maybe from back east. "We're playing cards. Girl," Samuel said. "Fetch us more whiskey." As she turned to leave, she heard Jack mutter, "Sam, you sure you want to keep raising? You're already in deep." "I got assets," Samuel replied with a laugh that made Mary's skin crawl. She busied herself in the kitchen area, hands trembling as she uncorked the bottle. Her mother had been gone 2 years now, taken by fever, and every day since had been a test of survival. Samuel had gotten meaner, his drinking heavier, and his gambling more reckless. When she returned with the whiskey, the atmosphere had changed. The men sat in tense silence, card face up on the table. Samuel's face had gone pale beneath his weathered tan. $400, Marcus Webb said slowly, like he was savoring each word. "That's what you owe me, Briggs. Time to pay up." "Now, Marcus, be reasonable," Samuel started, but Webb cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I've been reasonable for 3 months. You've run out of credit everywhere from here to Tucson. So what's it gonna be?" Mary watched her stepfather's eyes dart around the room like a cornered animal. Then they landed on her, and she saw something shift in his expression, a calculating look she'd never seen before. "What if—" Samuel licked his lips nervously. "What if I had something better than money?" "I don't deal in IOUs, Briggs." "Not an IOU!" Samuel grabbed Mary's wrist, yanking her forward. "Her!" The room went deadly quiet. Mary felt the blood drain from her face as the words sank in. Her own stepfather was trying to sell her like livestock. "You can't be serious," Jack Thornton said, though his eyes betrayed his interest. "Dead serious," Samuel replied. "She's young, strong, knows how to cook and clean. Never been touched by a man. That's got to be worth $400 to the right buyer." Marcus Webb leaned back in his chair, studying Mary like she was horseflesh at auction. "She's pretty enough, but untested goods are risky. How do I know she won't run first chance she gets?" "Chain her up if you have to," Samuel said with a shrug that shattered what little remained of Mary's world. "Not my problem once money changes hands." "No." The word tore from Mary's throat before she could stop it. "You can't do this. I'm not property." Samuel's backhand caught her across the cheek, sending her stumbling. "You'll do as you're told. Girl, your mama's not here to coddle you anymore." Through tears of pain and rage, Mary saw the stranger in expensive clothes shift uncomfortably. "This seems irregular," he said. "Welcome to the territories, friend." Marcus laughed. "Out here, possession is 9/10 of the law, and the law's usually drunk or paid off." "I'll take her," Webb decided. "But not for gambling debts. Cash only. Bring her to my establishment tomorrow night. and we'll complete the transaction." Mary's mind raced. Webb's establishment was the Desert Rose, a saloon and brothel on the wrong side of town. Everyone knew what happened to girls who went in there. Most were never seen again, shipped off to mining camps or worse places where young women disappeared into nightmares. "Tomorrow night it is," Samuel agreed, already reaching for the whiskey bottle to celebrate his deal. Mary backed away slowly, then turned and fled to her corner of the shack, behind the threadbare curtain that served as her only privacy. She collapsed onto her straw mattress and let the tears come, but only for a moment. Survival in Crimson Creek had taught her that tears solved nothing. She had to run, tonight. Mary waited until the poker game broke up and Samuel passed out in his chair, snoring loudly, moving like a shadow. She gathered her few possessions, her mother's silver locket, a change of clothes, the small knife she kept hidden, and the $3 she'd saved from taking in mending work. The window stuck as always, but desperation gave her strength. She forced it open just wide enough to squeeze through, wincing as the wood scraped against her ribs. Then she was out, dropping to the dusty ground behind the shack. Crimson Creek slept fitfully under a crescent moon. Mary knew she had maybe 6 hours before Samuel woke and discovered her gone. 6 hours to get as far from town as possible before Webb's men started hunting. She crept through back alleys, avoiding the main street where late-night drunks might spot her. At the edge of town, she paused at the crossroads. East led back toward civilization, but also toward places where Samuel might have connections. West led into the desert, toward the mountains and the unknown. Mary chose west. The road quickly became a trail, then barely a path. Her boots, already worn thin, offered little protection against the rocky ground, but she pressed on, driven by the kind of fear that makes impossibilities seem reasonable. By dawn, Crimson Creek had shrunk to a dark smudge on the horizon behind her. Mary's throat burned with thirst. Her feet bled through her boots, and she had no idea where she was going, but she was free, or at least running toward freedom. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert into a furnace. Mary sought shelter under a rocky overhang, rationing sips from the single canteen she'd managed to fill before fleeing. In the distance, she could see mountains that seemed to float in the heat shimmer, promising water and shade if she could only reach them. But she also saw the dust cloud rising from the direction of town riders, moving fast. Webb's men, or Samuel himself, coming to drag her back to a fate worse than death. Mary forced herself to her feet and continued west, stumbling now, exhaustion and dehydration taking their toll. The mountains seemed no closer, and the dust cloud behind was definitely gaining. That's when she saw it, a line of green cutting through the brown landscape ahead. Trees meant water, water meant life. And maybe, just maybe, a place to hide. With the last of her strength, Mary ran toward that ribbon of green, toward the unknown that had to be better than the hell she'd left behind. She didn't know that she was running toward a man named James Callahan, or that a simple river would become the setting for a moment that would change everything. She only knew she had to keep moving, keep fighting, keep believing that somewhere under the vast western sky, there was a place where a young woman could be more than property, where she could be free. The river appeared like a miracle through the cottonwoods, its water catching the late afternoon sun in broken diamonds of light. Mary stumbled through the brush, thorns catching at her skirts, her throat so parched that even breathing hurt. 3 days she'd been running, 3 days of hiding in caves and under rocks, eating nothing but the few bitter berries she'd found along the way. Behind her, she could no longer see dust clouds, but that didn't mean they'd given up. Men like Webb had long memories and longer reaches. They'd keep hunting until they found her or decided she wasn't worth the effort. Given what Samuel owed, she doubted they'd give up easily. Mary collapsed at the river's edge, plunging her face into the cool water. She drank deeply, too deeply, and her empty stomach cramped in protest, but she didn't care. After days in the desert, the water tasted like salvation itself. She was so focused on drinking, on the blessed relief of water on her cracked lips, that she almost missed the sound of splashing upstream. Almost. Mary froze, water dripping from her chin. Through the screen of willows, she could see movement, someone in the river. Her heart hammered against her ribs. If it was one of Webb's men. Carefully, silently, she crept closer, using the thick brush as cover. What she saw made her breath catch for an entirely different reason. A man stood waist-deep in the river, his back to her. Water streamed from his dark hair as he ducked under again, coming up with a gasp that sent droplets flying. His shoulders were broad, marked with scars that told stories she couldn't read. When he turned slightly, she caught a glimpse of his profile, sharp jawline, sun-weathered skin, maybe 35 years old. Mary knew she should run. A strange man alone in the wilderness was danger of a different kind than Webb, but danger nonetheless. Yet something held her in place. Maybe it was the way he moved through the water with quiet confidence, or how he paused to watch a hawk circle overhead. There was a stillness about him that spoke of a man comfortable with solitude. Then he turned fully, and she saw his eyes gray as winter storms, alert and watchful even in this moment of supposed privacy. Those eyes swept the riverbank, and Mary held her breath, pressing deeper into the shadows. James Callahan had lived too long and seen too much not to notice when he was being watched. The war had taught him that lesson in blood, and 5 years of wandering since hadn't let him forget. He'd felt the presence for the last minute, a prickle at the back of his neck that said he wasn't alone. His hand moved casually toward the rock where his gun belt lay coiled. Then he caught sight of her, just a flash of faded calico through the willows. A pale face framed by tangled blonde hair. A woman, young from what he could see, and scared. The fear rolled off her in waves he could almost taste. James made a decision. Instead of lunging for his weapon, he held very still, then slowly, deliberately, raised one hand in a gesture as old as the frontier itself. Peace, no harm intended. "I know you're there," he said, his voice carrying easily over the water's murmur. "I'm not going to hurt you." Mary's legs trembled with the urge to flee, but exhaustion held her in place. She'd been found. After everything, all the running, she'd been found. "You can come out," the man continued, "or you can stay hidden. Makes no difference to me, but you look like you could use some help." How could he know that from a glimpse through the bushes, Mary wondered? She stayed frozen, indecision paralyzing her. James waited another moment, then shrugged. "Suit yourself. I'm James Callahan. I've got a place about a quarter-mile upstream. There's food if you're hungry, which I'm guessing you are. I'll be heading back there once I'm done here. You can follow or not." He turned away, giving her the courtesy of privacy as he waded toward the bank where his clothes waited. Mary watched him dress with efficient movements, cotton shirt, worn pants, boots that had seen better decades. When he strapped on his gun belt, she noticed how his hand rested on the revolver's grip with practiced ease. This was a man who knew violence, who'd lived with it. But he hadn't threatened her, hadn't made any move toward her. He simply gathered his things and started walking upstream, leaving the choice entirely to her. Mary waited until he was nearly out of sight before she moved. Every instinct screamed at her to run the other direction. But where would she go? She had no food, no shelter, no idea where she was beyond somewhere west of Crimson Creek. And there was something about the man James Callahan. He'd said that felt different from the predators she'd known. She followed at a distance, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. The path along the river was easier than the rough country she'd been traversing, and soon she saw smoke rising above the trees. A few minutes later, a cabin came into view, small but solid, built of logs chinked with mud, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. James was sitting on that porch, cleaning his rifle with methodical strokes. He didn't look up when Mary emerged from the tree line, though she knew he was aware of her. "There's beans and cornbread on the stove," he said. "Help yourself." Mary hesitated at the edge of the clearing. Why? Now he did look up, those gray eyes studying her with an intensity that made her want to fidget. Why what? Why are you helping me? You don't know me. James set down the rifle and leaned back in his chair. I know enough. You're running from something or someone. You haven't eaten in days. You're scared but still standing, which means you're tougher than you look. And he paused, something flickering across his face. And I've been where you are, running, scared, hungry. Someone helped me once. Figure it's my turn to pass it on. Mary took a tentative step forward. I don't have any money to pay you. I didn't ask for any. Men always want something. That brought a smile to his face, though it didn't reach his eyes. True enough. What I want is to eat my supper in peace and not worry about finding a half-starved girl dead on my property come morning. That worth a bowl of beans to you? Despite everything, Mary felt her lips twitch toward a smile. When you put it that way. She climbed the porch steps slowly, still ready to run. The door was open, and she could smell the promised food's simple fare, but her stomach cramped with want. Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. A bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with a few books and supplies. A rifle rack on the wall held 2 more long guns, and she noticed ammunition boxes stacked neatly nearby. The pot on the stove was still warm. Mary served herself with shaking hands, trying not to wolf down the food like the starving animal she'd become. The cornbread was dry but filling, the beans seasoned with bacon fat and sage. It was the best meal she'd had in memory. James entered while she was eating, moving to the other side of the cabin to give her space. He busied himself with small tasks, adding wood to the stove, checking the windows, adjusting the lamp wick. Mary noticed how he never fully turned his back on her, never blocked her path to the door. He was being careful with her, she realized, the way you'd be careful with a spooked horse. Thank you, she said when she'd finished eating. He nodded acknowledgement. There's a stream out back if you want to wash up. I'll stay here. Mary did want to wash desperately. 3 days of desert travel had left her feeling like she'd been rolled in dust and dried in the sun. But trust only went so far. I'll wait, she said. James poured himself coffee from a pot on the stove, then sat at the table across from her. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair. His hands wrapped around the tin cup were scarred and capable. You want to tell me what you're running from? He asked. Mary's jaw tightened. No. Fair enough. How about a name I gave you mine? She hesitated, then decided a first name couldn't hurt. Mary. Well, Mary, here's how I see it. You need a place to rest and figure out your next move. I've got space and don't mind the company. Long as it's peaceful, you can stay a few days, get your strength back. No questions asked, no obligations. When you're ready to move on, I'll point you toward the nearest town and you can be on your way. It sounded too good to be true, which in Mary's experience meant it probably was. What's to stop you from being like whatever men you're running from? James finished. Nothing, I suppose, except my word and the fact that if I wanted to hurt you, I'd have done it already instead of feeding you supper. The blunt honesty of it was somehow reassuring. Mary found herself relaxing fractionally. I can work, she said. Cook, clean, mend things. I won't be a burden. We'll see about that tomorrow. Tonight, you rest. He stood, draining his coffee. You take the bed. I'll sleep on the porch. I couldn't. You could and you will. That's not negotiable. His tone brooked no argument. There's a bolt on the door if it makes you feel safer. I won't be offended. He gathered a blanket and headed outside, leaving Mary alone in the cabin. She stood uncertainly for a moment, then crossed to the door and, after a brief hesitation, slid the bolt home. If he heard it, he made no comment. The bed was narrow but clean, with a quilt that smelled of sage and wood smoke. Mary lay down fully clothed, her mother's locket clutched in one hand, the knife from her bundle in the other. She didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion was a powerful force. Just before she drifted off, she thought about the moment by the river, how James had stood in the water, scarred but unashamed, offering help to a stranger with no expectation of return, his hands reaching out in peace instead of violence. For the first time in days, maybe years, Mary felt something that might have been hope. The rooster's crow came with dawn, pulling Mary from the deepest sleep she'd had in months. For a moment, she forgot where she was, panic rising in her throat. Then memory returned the river. James Callahan, the cabin. She was safe, or at least safer than she'd been. Through the window, she could see James already at work, splitting wood with steady, rhythmic strokes. He'd shed his shirt in the morning heat, and she could see more scars crossing his back, some old and faded, others newer. War wounds, she guessed, though from which war she couldn't say. Mary rose and attempted to tame her hair with her fingers, then gave up. She unbolted the door and stepped onto the porch, breathing in air scented with pine and river water. "Morning," James said without pausing in his work. "Coffee's on the stove." She poured herself a cup, wrapping her hands around the warm tin. "I said I could work. What needs doing?" James embedded the axe in the chopping block and turned to face her. "You always this eager to pay debts that don't exist?" "I don't like owing people." "Smart policy." He gestured toward the chicken coop she hadn't noticed the night before. "Hens need feeding, eggs need gathering. After that, we'll see." The chickens were a spirited bunch, pecking at Mary's skirts as she scattered feed. She found 8 eggs in the nesting boxes, carrying them carefully back to the cabin. James had resumed his wood splitting, and she watched him from the corner of her eye as she worked. Inside, she took stock of the kitchen supplies: basic but adequate flour, lard, salt pork, dried beans, a few withered potatoes. She could work with this. By the time James came in, she had biscuits in the oven and eggs frying in the skillet. "You didn't have to," he started. "Yes, I did," Mary interrupted. "You've been living on beans and cornbread, haven't you, bachelor cooking?" A smile ghosted across his face. That obvious. They ate in companionable silence. Mary noticed how James kept his back to the wall, his gun within reach. Old habits, she supposed. She had her own sitting where she could see both door and window, her knife tucked in her boot. "So," James said finally, "you know your way around a kitchen. Ranch girl." "Town girl. My mother took in washing and mending. I learned to make a little go a long way. Useful skill out here." He pushed back from the table. "I need to check the fence line today. You're welcome to come along or stay here." Mary considered. Being alone in the cabin felt safer, but also trapped. "I'll come." They saddled 2 horses James's bay gelding and a gentle mare he said he'd been meaning to sell. Mary hadn't ridden much, but she managed well enough. They followed a trail that wound through pine forest and open meadow, the mountains rising blue and distant to the north. "Your place is beautiful," Mary said. "It's peaceful," James agreed. "That's what I was looking for when I settled here." After the war, he glanced at her sharply. "What makes you think I was in the war?" "The way you move, the scars. My father was in the war. He came back different." James was quiet for a long moment. "Which side was he on?" "Union, you, Confederate." He said it without pride or shame. Just fact. "Georgia Cavalry. Seems like a lifetime ago now." They reached a section where the fence had been knocked down, posts scattered like broken teeth. James dismounted to examine the damage. "Cattle?" Mary asked. "Maybe, or someone who wanted it to look like cattle." He pointed to marks in the dirt. "See here, boot prints, fresh ones." Mary felt ice in her stomach. "Someone's been here." "Yesterday, maybe day before." James remounted. his casual manner replaced by sharp alertness. "We should head back." They rode faster on the return trip, James constantly scanning their surroundings. As they neared the cabin, he held up a hand for silence. Smoke still rose from the chimney. Everything looked normal, but Mary had learned to trust his instincts. "Stay here," he whispered, dismounting and drawing his revolver. But Mary had spotted movement by the corral. "James!" The shot came from the trees, splitting the air where James had been standing. He rolled behind a water trough as more shots followed, splinters flying from the wooden planks. "Well, well," a voice called out. "James Callahan. Been a long time." James's face had gone hard as granite. "Not long enough. Wade." 3 men emerged from cover, guns drawn. They had the look of hired guns, trail-worn clothes, tied-down holsters, eyes that had seen too much violence and grown to like it. "Boss wants to talk to you," Wade said. He was tall and lean, with a scar that pulled his mouth into a permanent sneer. "About that business in Tucson. Tell Morrison that business was settled 5 years ago," James replied. "He doesn't see it that way. His brother's still dead." "His brother was a murderer and a thief. He drew first." "Maybe so, but blood's blood." Wade's eyes found Mary, still mounted and frozen with fear. "Who's the girl?" "No one who concerns you." Wade laughed, an ugly sound. "Everything concerns me when I'm working. Pretty little thing. She yours?" "I said she's no concern of yours." James's voice had dropped to a dangerous quiet. "You've delivered your message. Now get off my land." "Can't do that. Callahan, boss wants you to come have a chat, civilized-like." "And if I refuse?" Wade shrugged. "Then we do this the hard way, though I'd hate for the girl to get caught in the crossfire." Mary's hand crept toward the knife in her boot. These men were different from Webb's thugs, more dangerous, more professional. And they'd come for James. Not her. She could run, leave him to his past troubles. But she thought of his kindness, his quiet protection. She couldn't abandon him. James must have been thinking along similar lines. "Mary," he said without looking at her, "ride back the way we came. Don't stop until you reach the Baxter Ranch. Tell them—" "I'm not leaving," she interrupted. "This isn't your fight. You made it mine when you helped me." Wade chuckled. "Touching. But nobody's going anywhere until—" The rest of his words were lost as James moved. He came up from behind the trough, firing as he went. Wade dove for cover as his men scattered. Mary's horse reared at the gunfire, and she fought to control it. "The cabin!" James shouted. "Get inside!" Mary slid from the saddle and ran, bullets whining past her head. She burst through the door and immediately went for the rifle rack. Her hands shook as she loaded a Henry repeater, but her father had taught her to shoot before he died. Some lessons you didn't forget. Through the window, she could see James pinned down behind a woodpile. Wade's men had spread out, trying to flank him. One was creeping along the corral fence, almost in position for a clear shot. Mary didn't think. She raised the rifle, sighted, and squeezed the trigger. The man spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. The girl's got teeth," someone shouted. The firefight intensified. Mary shot when she had clear targets, trying to give James covering fire, but they were outnumbered, and Wade's men knew their business. Then she herded horses approaching fast. More of Morrison's men. But James was grinning now, a fierce expression that transformed his face. "About time, you old coot," he called out. Riders burst into the clearing, 3 men wearing deputy badges, led by a grizzled oldster with a magnificent mustache. "James Callahan, you're disturbing my peaceful afternoon," the oldster bellowed. Then, to Wade, "You boys want to drop those guns, or do we do this the messy way?" Wade looked at the deputies, calculated odds, and slowly holstered his weapon. "This isn't over. Callahan." "It is as far as you're concerned." The deputy said, "I'm Sheriff Tom Brennan, and you boys are under arrest for attempted murder. destruction of property, and generally being a pain in my posterior. We've got papers. Wade protested. Legal bounty on Callahan from Arizona Territory. This is New Mexico Territory. Son, your papers aren't worth much here. Besides, I know the Morrison business. That bounty's built on lies and bribery. Brennan's eyes were hard as flint. Now, you coming peaceful? Or do my boys get target practice? Wade surrendered with ill grace. As the deputies secured the prisoners, Brennan approached the cabin. You can come out now. Miss Excitement's over. Mary emerged slowly, still clutching the rifle. James met her on the porch, gently taking the weapon from her hands. You all right? He asked. She nodded, though her knees felt like water. Who's Morrison? James's jaw tightened. A man who thinks money can buy justice. His brother and I had a disagreement 5 years ago. It ended badly for him. And now he wants revenge. Something like that. He looked at Brennan. Thanks for coming. Tom. Saw the smoke signal from your chimney. 3 puffs, pause. 3 puffs. Figured you had trouble. The sheriff studied Mary with shrewd eyes. Don't believe we've been introduced. Miss Mary, she said simply. Well, Miss Mary, that was some fine shooting. Where'd you learn, My father. Brennan nodded approval. You planning on staying in these parts? Mary looked at James, suddenly uncertain. His past had just arrived with guns blazing. Maybe she'd be safer moving on. But James surprised her. That's up to her, he said. But she's welcome here as long as she wants. Good. Brennan tipped his hat. We'll haul these boys to town. Let them cool their heels in jail. But Callahan, you know Morrison won't give up. He's got deep pockets and a long memory. I know. After the lawmen left with their prisoners, James and Mary stood in the dusty yard, surveying the damage. Bullet holes pocked the cabin walls, and one window was shattered. I'm sorry, Mary said. I brought trouble to your door. James shook his head. This trouble's been brewing for years. Had nothing to do with you. He paused. Though you handled yourself well, that shot probably saved my life. Then we're even. Not quite. You stuck when you could have run. That counts for something. He started gathering scattered tools and supplies. We'd better patch these holes before dark. Then I think we need to talk about what comes next. As they worked side by side, Mary realized something had shifted. She wasn't just a refugee anymore, and he wasn't just her protector. They'd faced danger together and survived. That created a bond different from gratitude or obligation. The sun was setting by the time they finished basic repairs. Over a simple supper, James told her more about Morrison, a rich rancher who'd used his brother as an enforcer until James had been forced to kill him in self-defense. The law had cleared James, but Morrison's money kept the threat alive. You could leave, Mary suggested quietly. Start over somewhere else. I've done enough running. This is my home now. He met her eyes across the table. But you should think about moving on. Town's not far. And Tom Brennan would see you got somewhere safe. Mary thought about it, really thought about it. She could go to another town, find work, try to build a life. It would be the smart thing, the safe thing. But she'd been running towards safety all her life. And where had it gotten her? I'd like to stay, she said, if the offer's still good. James's smile was slow but genuine. It is, though I should warn you, ranch life's not easy, especially with Morrison's shadow hanging over it. I'm not looking for easy, just... She searched for the right word. Just real, something real and honest. I can promise you that, at least. He stood and walked to a shelf, pulling down a worn book. My mother used to read to us from this when I was young. Haven't opened it in years. He handed it to her poetry. She saw Byron and Shelley and Keats. Read to me, she asked, surprising herself with the boldness of it. So she did, by lamplight, while outside the coyotes sang to the stars, and for a few hours they were just two people finding solace in words written long ago and far away, building something fragile and precious in a hard land that didn't forgive weakness. But both knew this peace was temporary. Morrison would come, and the past had a way of demanding its due. The question was whether what they were building together would be strong enough to survive it. 2 weeks passed in a rhythm of daily chores and quiet evenings. Mary learned to milk the temperamental cow James had named Bessie, to predict weather by the way the mountains looked at sunset, and to move through the cabin without making the floorboards creak. She'd taken to wearing her hair in a practical braid and had patched her worn dress with fabric from an old shirt James no longer wore. They'd fallen into an easy routine. She cooked while he tended the animals. They worked the vegetable garden together in the cool mornings, and evenings found them on the porch, him whittling while she mended clothes or read aloud from his small collection of books. It was during one such evening that they heard the horses approaching. James set down his whittling knife, hand moving to his gun, but the rider who emerged from the twilight was Sheriff Brennan, and he wasn't alone. "Callahan," Brennan called out. "Got someone here says he's looking for a missing girl." Mary's blood turned to ice. Behind Brennan rode Samuel Briggs, her stepfather, and with him was Marcus Webb himself, dressed in a black suit that made him look like an undertaker. 2 more men flanked them, hired guns by their look. "That's her," Samuel pointed at Mary. "That's my ungrateful daughter, run off like a thief in the night." "Stepdaughter," Mary corrected, finding her voice. "And I'm no thief." Webb dismounted with practiced ease, his dark eyes taking in the scene. "Miss Whitfield, your father's been worried sick. We've searched for days." "Worried about his gambling debts, you mean?" Mary shot back. Now, Webb said smoothly. "Let's discuss this like civilized folks. Sheriff, this young woman is under her father's legal authority. She's not yet 21, and by territorial law—" "I know the law," Brennan interrupted. "Question is whether it applies here." James had remained silent, but now he stepped forward. "The lady's under my protection. Sheriff, she came here of her own free will." Samuel's face flushed red. "Protection living with a man without marriage. You've ruined her reputation." "Seems to me you are planning to ruin more than her reputation," James replied coldly. "Selling her to pay gambling debts." "That's a lie," Samuel blustered. But Webb held up a hand. "Gentlemen, please. We're all reasonable men here. Mr. Briggs simply wants his daughter returned home where she belongs. Surely you can understand a father's concern." "He's not my father," Mary said, "and I'm never going back with him." "You'll do as you're told." "Girl," Samuel started forward, but James blocked his path. "Touch her and you'll regret it," James said quietly. The tension stretched tight as a bowstring. Webb's men had spread out slightly, hands near their weapons. Sheriff Brennan watched it all with calculating eyes. "Here's how I see it," Brennan said, finally. "Miss Mary is of age to make her own choices, regardless of what her stepfather wants. Unless you got legal papers saying otherwise." Webb produced a document from his coat. "As a matter of fact, Sheriff, we do." Signed affidavit from Mr. Briggs asserting his legal guardianship, plus a complaint of theft. Apparently, young Mary took some money when she left. $3, Mary said. $3 I earned doing mending. Money that belonged to the household. Webb countered. "Technically, that makes her a fugitive." James laughed, a harsh sound. $3. You rode all this way for $3. "It's the principle," Webb said. But his eyes were on Mary, and she knew exactly what principle he meant. He'd paid for her, or thought he had, and Marcus Webb always collected on his debts. "Tell you what," James said. He pulled coins from his pocket and tossed them at Samuel's feet. "There's $5. That covers the 3+ interest. Debt paid." Samuel scrambled for the money, but Webb's voice cut like a whip. It's not that simple. Mr. Callahan, there's the matter of a binding agreement between Mr. Briggs and myself. What agreement? Brennan demanded. Webb smiled thinly. A business arrangement, Mr. Briggs agreed to have his daughter work off his debts in my establishment, a perfectly legal indenture contract. I never signed anything, Mary protested. Your father signed for you. The law allows it. The hell it does, James growled. That's slavery by another name. It's business, Webb corrected. And it's legal. Sheriff, I must insist you enforce the law. Brennan looked uncomfortable. Let me see this contract. Webb handed over another paper. The sheriff studied it, frowning. This is dated 3 days ago. That's after Miss Mary left home. A mere technicality. The agreement was verbal before that. We simply formalized it. You can't backdate a contract to enslave someone. James's hand was on his gun now. Careful, Mr. Callahan, Webb warned. Threatening legal representatives is a serious crime. Sheriff, are you going to do your duty? Brennan was clearly torn. Mary could see him weighing the law against what was right, his job against his conscience. Before he could decide, she stepped forward. Sheriff Brennan, she said clearly, I need to tell you something. 3 nights ago, my stepfather struck me and tried to sell me to Mr. Webb to pay gambling debts. I fled in fear of my life and virtue. Mr. Callahan gave me shelter and has treated me with nothing but respect. If the law says I must return to be sold like cattle, then the law is wrong. You lying witch! Samuel lunged for her, but James's fist caught him square in the jaw, dropping him like a stone. Instantly, Webb's men went for their guns. James pushed Mary behind him as he drew, but Brennan's voice cracked like thunder. Nobody move first man to clear leather gets a bullet from me. Everyone froze. Samuel groaned from the ground, blood dripping from his mouth. Here's what's going to happen, Brennan announced. Mr. Briggs, you're under arrest for assault and attempted trafficking. Webb, your papers aren't worth spit to me. A contract signed after the fact to sell a free woman. Take that to a real judge and see how far it gets you. This is a mistake, Sheriff, Webb said coldly. I have influence. Not in my jurisdiction. Now, you can ride out peaceful, or I can arrest you for conspiracy. Your choice. Webb's face was marble. And the girl, Miss Mary, is a free citizen who can live where she pleases. Anyone who bothers her will answer to me. Brennan's hand rested on his gun. That clear enough? For a long moment, Webb stared at Mary with those dead eyes. This isn't over, he said finally. Debts must be paid, one way or another. Get out, James said. And if you come near her again, I'll kill you. Webb smiled, a chilling expression. Many men have tried. Mr. Callahan, I'm still here. He turned to his men. We're leaving. As they prepared to ride out, Samuel struggled to his feet. You can't arrest me. She's my daughter. Stepdaughter, Brennan corrected, pulling out shackles. And you just confessed to trying to sell her. That's enough for any judge. As the sheriff led Samuel away, and Webb's group disappeared into the darkness, Mary found herself trembling. James guided her to the porch steps, sitting beside her. It's all right, he said. They're gone. Webb won't give up. You heard him. Let him come. I've faced worse. Mary looked at him, this man who'd stood between her and danger without hesitation. Why do you keep protecting me? You barely know me. James was quiet for a moment. Maybe because I recognize something in you. That look in your eyes when you first got here, I've seen it in the mirror. The look of someone who's been broken but refuses to stay down. I'm not broken, Mary said, though her voice shook. No, James agreed. Bent, maybe, but not broken. Takes real strength to run toward freedom instead of accepting chains. They sat in silence as the stars emerged. Finally, Mary asked, what happens now? Now we post a watch. I'll wire some old friends. Let them know Webb might be planning something. Tom Brennan's a good man. But Webb's right, he has influence. We need to be ready. I've brought you nothing but trouble. James surprised her by chuckling. Mary, I was in trouble long before you showed up. At least now I've got a good reason to fight. She looked at him questioningly. Freedom, he explained. Yours and mine both. Men like Webb and Morrison. They think money gives them the right to own people. Someone needs to teach them different. And you're going to do that? We are, he corrected. You proved today you're not running anymore. Question is, are you ready to stand and fight? Mary thought about it, about years of fear, of being treated like property, of having no voice. Then she thought about these past 2 weeks, the quiet dignity of choosing her own path, the simple joy of being treated as an equal. I'm ready, she said. James smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. Good, because I have a feeling this is just the beginning. As if in answer to his words, a coyote howled in the distance, its cry taken up by others until the night sang with wild voices. Mary shivered, but not from fear. Something had changed tonight. She'd claimed her freedom in front of witnesses, and James had stood with her. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. They prepared for siege, checking weapons, securing the property. James showed her where he kept extra ammunition, taught her the layout of defensive positions around the cabin. It was a grim education, but necessary. Webb will likely hire more men, James explained. He'll try to make it look legal, maybe forge new papers or bribe officials. We need to be ready for anything. What about Morrison? Won't he take advantage if Webb attacks? Possibly, or they might join forces. James's expression was troubled. I should send you somewhere safe until this blows over. No, Mary's voice was firm. I'm through running. This is my home now, too. James studied her face, then nodded slowly. All right, then we make our stand together. That night, Mary lay in bed listening to James patrol outside. She thought about Webb's cold eyes, about the violence that was surely coming. Fear coiled in her stomach, but underneath it was something stronger determination. She'd tasted freedom, and she would die before giving it up. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, and the air smelled of coming rain. Change was in the wind, and with it, the promise of battles yet to be fought. The nightmare came in the deep hours before dawn. Mary thrashed in her sleep, caught in dreams of rough hands and leering faces, of being dragged back to that poker table where her stepfather had tried to barter her away like a horse or a saddle. She woke with a strangled cry, heart hammering, nightgown soaked with cold sweat. Thunder rumbled outside, and lightning illuminated the cabin in stark flashes. The storm that had been building for days had finally broken, rain hammering on the roof like gunfire. Mary sat up, pulling the quilt around her shoulders, trying to shake off the lingering terror of the dream. A soft knock came at the door. Mary, you all right? James's voice, concerned but respectful of the barrier between them. She rose and opened the door to find him standing there, fully dressed despite the hour, water dripping from his hat. I'm sorry, she said. Did I wake you? I was on watch. Heard you cry out. His eyes took in her pale face, the trembling she couldn't quite hide. Bad dreams. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Want some coffee? I've got a pot on the stove. Mary followed him to the main room, grateful for the normalcy of the gesture. The fire in the stove cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the cabin feel like a sanctuary against the storm outside. She sat at the table while James poured 2 cups, the familiar ritual soothing her jangled nerves. It's been 3 days since Webb left, she said finally. Maybe he's given up. James sat across from her, his face serious. Men like Webb don't give up. They just regroup. He paused, studying her. You want to talk about the dream? It's always the same. I'm back there, in that room, and Samuel's selling me again. Only this time, you don't find me by the river. This time, nobody helps. But that's not what happened, James said gently. You saved yourself. You ran. And found you. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. Something shifted in James's expression, a softness that made him look younger. Mary, Lightning split the sky, and in its harsh light, they both saw movement outside. James was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Get down, he ordered, moving to the window. Mary dropped behind the overturned table they'd positioned as cover, her own rifle ready. Through the rain, she could see shapes moving, men on foot, using the storm as cover. How many? She whispered. 6, maybe 7. James's voice was grim. They're spreading out, trying to surround us. A voice called through the storm, not Webb's cultured tones, but rough and commanding. Callahan, we know you're in there. Send out the girl and we'll leave peaceful like. Go to hell, James shouted back. Now, that's not neighborly, mister. Webb's offering good money for her return. No need for anyone to get hurt. Mary recognized tactical positioning when she saw it. These weren't Webb's usual thugs. These were professionals, probably hired from the mining camps where life was cheap and morals were cheaper. They're going to rush us, James said quietly. When they do, focus on the ones coming from the east. I'll handle the west side. James! Mary's throat was tight with fear. Not for herself, but for him. He looked at her, and for a moment, his guard dropped completely. Whatever happens, you keep fighting. Promise me. I promise. The attack came with the next lightning strike. Men emerged from the darkness, firing as they came. The cabin windows shattered under the onslaught. Glass and rain spraying inside. Mary fired through the opening, saw a man spin and fall. James's rifle cracked steadily, picking targets with deadly accuracy. But there were too many, and they were too well organized. Mary heard boots on the porch, saw the door splinter under heavy kicks. A man burst through, gun raised, and she shot him point blank, the rifle bucking hard against her shoulder. He fell backward, clutching his chest, and she tried not to think about the life she'd just ended. The roof! James yelled. She heard scrambling overhead. Someone had climbed up despite the rain. Before she could react, part of the ceiling gave way and a man dropped through. James wheeled to fire, but another attacker came through the door at the same moment. Everything happened at once. James's shot took the man from the roof, but the one in the doorway fired first. Mary watched in horror as James staggered, blood blooming across his shirt. No, she fired at the doorman, forcing him to dive for cover, then rushed to James as he fell to one knee. It's not bad, he gasped, though the blood said otherwise. Keep fighting. But Mary was done being afraid. A cold fury filled her as she stood over James, firing at anything that moved. The remaining attackers, perhaps surprised by her ferocity, pulled back momentarily. In the lull, she helped James to cover behind the overturned table. His face was pale, jaw tight with pain. The bullet had caught him in the left shoulder, blood seeping steadily through his fingers as he pressed against the wound. There's whiskey in the cabinet, he said through gritted teeth. Pour it on the wound. Mary found the bottle, along with clean cloth she'd boiled earlier for bandages James had insisted on preparing for the worst. As she worked to clean and bind his shoulder, they could hear the attackers regrouping outside. Callahan, the rough voice called again. You're wounded and outnumbered. This doesn't have to end badly. James struggled to reload his rifle one-handed. They'll kill us both the moment they get what they want. Mary knew he was right. Webb wouldn't leave witnesses, especially not James. She looked around desperately, her mind racing. The storm, the darkness there had to be a way to use it. Then she remembered the lamp oil. I have an idea. She whispered, Can you hold them off for 2 minutes? What are you planning? Trust me. James nodded, positioning himself to cover the door. Mary grabbed the oil container, splashing it liberally around the windows and the hole in the roof. The rain would make it harder to spread, but if she could create enough smoke and confusion— "Ready," she called. James started firing, steady shots that kept the attackers at bay. Mary lit a piece of kindling from the stove and touched it to the oil. Flames roared up despite the rain, creating a barrier of fire and smoke. "The barn!" she shouted. "We can make it to the barn!" Supporting James, they stumbled out the back as smoke filled the cabin. The storm covered their movement, rain washing away their tracks. They made it to the barn just as shouts erupted behind them. The attackers had discovered their escape. Inside the barn, horses stamped nervously at the smoke smell. Mary helped James into an empty stall, then grabbed his Winchester and extra ammunition. "You're full of surprises," James managed, his smile pained but genuine. "I'm not losing you," Mary said fiercely. "Not now." His good hand found hers, squeezing gently. "Mary, if something happens—" "Nothing's going to happen." She checked the rifle, counting bullets. "Because we're both getting out of this." The barn door exploded inward. Mary fired without hesitation, driving the attackers back. In the confusion of smoke and storm, she couldn't tell how many were left. James tried to help, but his wound was bleeding again, his shots going wide. Then, through the chaos, came a new sound: horses, lots of them, and a voice bellowing orders. Sheriff Brennan burst into the barn, badge glinting, gun drawn. "Nobody move, this is the law." The firefight was brief but decisive, caught between Mary in the barn and Brennan's posse outside. The remaining attackers surrendered quickly, as deputies rounded up prisoners. Brennan hurried to where Mary knelt beside James. "Doc's on his way." The sheriff said, "How bad is it?" "Bad enough," James said weakly. "How did you know?" "Telegraph from Fort Grant. Army patrol spotted armed men heading this way. Thought it might be Apache trouble. When I saw the smoke—" He shook his head. "You two are lucky." Mary didn't feel lucky. She felt terrified as James's eyes started to close. "Stay with me," she pleaded. "You hear me? You stay with me." His hand tightened on hers. "Not going anywhere. Too stubborn." The doctor arrived with dawn, working by lamplight to extract the bullet and clean the wound. Mary refused to leave James's side, holding his hand through the procedure. When it was over, the doctor pronounced him likely to survive if infection didn't set in. "He's tough," the doctor said. "And he's got a good nurse. I see." As James slept, Mary kept vigil. The cabin was partially burned but salvageable. The attackers were headed for jail. Though Webb himself was nowhere to be found, he'd hired others to do his dirty work, maintaining plausible deniability. Brennan sat with her as the sun climbed higher. "You did good, Miss Mary. Not many would have stood their ground like that. I couldn't let them take me, or hurt him." The sheriff studied her shrewdly. "It's more than that. Isn't it you care for him?" Mary looked at James's sleeping face, peaceful despite the bandages. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "I do." "Well, he's a good man, despite his past, or maybe because of it." Brennan stood to leave. "I'll post deputies here for a few days, just in case. But I think Webb's learned his lesson. You're more trouble than you're worth." After he left, Mary continued her watch. James stirred occasionally, mumbling in his sleep fragments of old battles, names of men long dead. She soothed him with cool cloths and gentle words, and gradually he calmed. As afternoon shadows lengthened, his eyes finally opened, clear and aware. "You're here," he said softly. "Where else would I be? Free, safe, somewhere that doesn't involve getting shot at." Mary squeezed his hand. "I am free, and the only place I feel safe is with you." James studied her face, seeing something there that made him try to sit up despite the pain. Mary, I need to tell you something. My past— I don't care about your past, she interrupted. I care about the man who gave me shelter, who stood between me and danger, who treated me as an equal when the world said I was property. You deserve better than a broken-down gunfighter. You're not broken, Mary said firmly. You're healing. We both are. For a long moment, they looked at each other, years of loneliness and pain giving way to something tender and new. Then James lifted his good hand to touch her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. When I saw you that day by the river, he said quietly, I thought I was seeing a spirit, something too pure for this hard world. I was wrong. Mary's heart sank. Wrong! You're not some delicate spirit. You're a warrior, strong and brave and fierce. His voice dropped to a whisper. And somehow, you've made me believe I might be worth saving too. The space between them seemed to shrink, drawn by forces neither fully understood. Mary leaned closer, her heart racing as it had that first day, but now for entirely different reasons. But James pulled back slightly, conflict clear in his eyes. You're still young, still innocent in ways that matter. I won't take advantage. You're not, Mary said firmly. I'm choosing this, choosing you, unless— she faltered. Unless you don't want— God help me, I do, James admitted. More than I should, more than is wise. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Another storm building, but inside the barn, there was only warmth and the tentative hope of two damaged souls finding solace in each other. They didn't kiss, not yet. There would be time for that when James was healed, when the threats were truly past. But Mary rested her forehead against his, and they breathed together, sharing air and space and the promise of tomorrow. Outside, night fell over the desert, but for the first time in longer than either could remember, the darkness held no fear. The morning sun painted the desert gold as Mary worked in the garden, humming softly. 2 weeks had passed since the attack, and James was finally strong enough to sit on the porch, though she'd forbidden him from any real work. The burned section of the cabin had been repaired with help from neighbors who'd heard about the fight, and life had settled into a new rhythm. But beneath the peaceful surface, tension simmered. Webb had vanished like smoke, and his absence worried James more than his presence would have. Men like Webb didn't forgive debts, especially when they'd been publicly humiliated. "Riders coming," James called from the porch. Mary straightened, shading her eyes. 3 men approached from the east, and her hand instinctively moved toward the rifle she kept nearby. But as they drew closer, she recognized Sheriff Brennan's distinctive mustache. The sheriff dismounted, his face grim. With him were 2 men Mary didn't know, one tall and lean with silver hair, the other younger with the look of a career soldier. "Morning, folks," Brennan said, though his tone suggested anything but a pleasant social call. "This is Federal Marshal Hugh Morrison and Captain Beck from Fort Grant." Mary's blood chilled. Morrison, the same name as James's old enemy. James stood slowly, his hand casual but near his gun. "Marshal, didn't know the federal boys were interested in our little troubles." "Cut the act, Callahan," Morrison said coldly. "You know why I'm here, my brother's death." "Your brother was tried and hanged for murder 5 years ago," James replied evenly. "I had nothing to do with it beyond defending myself when he tried to bushwhack me." "So you say, but new evidence has come to light." Morrison produced a paper. "Sworn affidavit from a witness saying you provoked the fight, that you murdered an innocent man." "What witness?" James demanded. "I want a name." "Marcus Webb." Captain Beck supplied. "He came forward last week with information about your violent past." Mary stepped forward. "Webb is a liar and a human trafficker. He tried to buy me from my stepfather." Morrison's eyes flicked to her dismissively. "Young woman, This doesn't concern you." "The hell it doesn't," she fired back. "Webb's using you to get revenge because we stopped him from kidnapping me." "Miss Whitfield," Brennan interjected, "maybe we should all calm down and discuss this reasonable-like." But James's face had gone hard as granite. "This isn't about justice, is it, Morrison? This is about revenge, and you're using a federal badge to get it." "I'm serving a warrant for your arrest," Morrison replied. "You can come peacefully or in chains. Your choice." "On what charge?" Brennan demanded. "That affidavit isn't worth the paper it's written on. Webb's a known criminal who hasn't been convicted of anything." Morrison cut him off. "Unlike Callahan here, who has quite a history. Did you know about his time in Yuma prison, sheriff, or the men he killed in Kansas?" Mary looked at James, saw the weight of old sins in his eyes, but she also saw the man who'd saved her, protected her, shown her kindness when the world had been cruel. "I don't care what he did before," she said firmly. "I know who he is now." "Touching," Morrison sneered. "But the law doesn't deal in sentiment." He nodded to Captain Beck. "Arrest him." Everything happened fast. As Beck stepped forward, a shot rang out from the ridge above the cabin. Beck spun and fell, clutching his arm. More shots followed, and suddenly the yard was chaos. "Ambush!" Brennan shouted, diving for cover. James grabbed Mary, pulling her behind the water trough as bullets whined overhead. Morrison scrambled for his horse but took a bullet in the leg, dropping him in the dust. Through the gunfire, Mary heard a familiar voice, Webb's cultured tones carrying clearly. "Gentlemen, this doesn't concern most of you. I only want the girl and Callahan. The rest can leave." "Like hell," Brennan roared back, returning fire. But they were pinned down, caught in crossfire from multiple positions. Webb had planned this carefully, using Morrison's arrival as cover for his own attack. "How many?" James asked tersely. Mary risked a look. 8, maybe 10. They've got the high ground. James's jaw tightened. He was still weak from his wound, and they both knew it. In a prolonged fight, they'd lose. "Mary," he said quietly, "when I start shooting, you run for the barn, take the mare and ride for town. I'm not leaving you." "This is my fight." "No," she grabbed his shirt. "It's our fight. We stand together or not at all." Before he could argue, she was moving, using every scrap of cover. Mary worked her way toward the cabin where extra ammunition waited. Bullets sparked off rocks inches from her head, but she made it, diving through the door. Inside, she grabbed ammunition boxes and James's second rifle. Through the window, she could see him pinned behind the trough, Brennan nearby trying to reach the wounded Morrison. Beck was down, maybe dead. Then she saw something else movement in the smoke from Webb's guns, a pattern to their fire, a gap in their coverage. If someone could reach the old mine shaft on the north side. Mary made her decision. Slipping out the back, she circled wide. Using the terrain James had taught her to read, every shadow could hide death. Every step could be her last. But she pressed on, driven by determination and something fiercer love for the man fighting below. She reached the mine entrance just as one of Webb's men was reloading. He saw her too late. Mary's rifle butt caught him in the temple, dropping him silently. She took his position, finally able to see the battlefield from above. Webb had maybe 6 men left, spread in a semicircle around the cabin. Webb himself stood bold as brass on a rocky outcrop, directing the assault like a general. Mary sighted carefully, remembering James's lessons about windage and distance. Her first shot took one of Webb's men in the shoulder, spinning him around. Her second sent another diving for cover. Suddenly, the attackers were the ones pinned, caught between her position and the defenders below. "Someone's flanked us!" a voice shouted. Webb turned, scanning for the new threat, and his eyes found Mary. For a moment, they stared at each other across the distance, predator and prey. Except now she held a gun and the high ground. "You Webb's composure finally cracked. "This is all your fault." Mary's answer was another shot that sent rock chips flying near his head. Webb ducked, shouting orders, but his men were already wavering. 2 were down, others wounded, and now they faced fire from 2 directions. Below, James seized the opportunity. Despite his wound, he charged from cover, Brennan beside him. The sight of the legendary gunfighter advancing with deadly purpose broke what remained of the attacker's nerve. "Fall back!" someone yelled, and Webb's carefully planned ambush dissolved into chaos. Mary kept firing, covering James's advance. She saw Webb trying to rally his men, saw him raise his own weapon toward James. Time slowed as she realized she was too far away. The angle was wrong. She couldn't. The shot came from an unexpected quarter. Marshal Morrison, bleeding from his leg wound, had managed to draw his weapon. His bullet caught Webb's center mass, sending the man tumbling from his perch. In moments, it was over. The surviving attackers threw down their weapons, hands raised. James reached Webb where he lay in the dust, life fading from those cold eyes. "Should have had her," Webb gasped. "Paid good money. She was never for sale," James said quietly. "Some things can't be bought." Webb's laugh was bitter, choked with blood. "Everything has a price. Callahan, even you." His eyes shifted to Morrison. "Tell him about Kansas." But death took him before he could say more. Mary climbed down from her position, legs shaky with delayed reaction. James met her halfway, catching her as her knees buckled. "That was insane," he said roughly, holding her tight. "Brave and brilliant and completely insane." "I learned from the best," she managed, clinging to him. Sheriff Brennan approached, supporting the wounded Morrison. "Marshal, I think you need to reconsider that warrant." Morrison's face was pale with pain and something else, perhaps shame. "Webb played me for a fool, fed me lies about my brother, about Callahan." He looked at James. What did he mean about Kansas? James was quiet for a moment. "Your brother wasn't the first of his gang I killed. There were 3 others in Kansas who tried to rob a bank. I was working as a guard. They killed 2 innocent people before I stopped them. And you never said anything. Didn't see the point. Your brother was dead, and you were grieving. Knowing he'd been part of something worse wouldn't have helped." Morrison closed his eyes. "All these years, I've been hating the wrong man." "Hate's a heavy burden," James said simply. "Maybe it's time to put it down." Captain Beck, his arm in a sling but alive, supervised the arrest of Webb's surviving men. As they were led away, one called out, "It ain't over. Webb had partners, powerful men who don't like losing investments." "Let them come," James replied, steel in his voice. "We'll be ready." As the sun climbed toward noon, the yard looked like a battlefield, which it had been. But Mary and James stood together, battered but unbroken. Sheriff Brennan organized the cleanup while Morrison, despite his wound, formally withdrew all charges against James. "I owe you an apology," the marshal said, "and likely my life, if you hadn't fought when Webb ambushed us." "We all fought," James corrected. "Even you, at the end." Morrison nodded slowly. "Maybe there's hope for me yet?" He looked at Mary. "You've got yourself a remarkable woman. Callahan, don't let her go." "I don't intend to," James said softly, his arm around Mary's shoulders, as the lawmen prepared to leave with their prisoners. Brennan pulled James aside. "This won't be the end of it. Webb had connections back east, men who won't take kindly to losing their investment." "I know, but we'll face it together." Brennan smiled. "I believe you will. Take care of each other." As the dust settled and quiet returned to the desert, Mary and James stood on the porch of their battle-scarred home. The cabin could be repaired, the garden replanted. What mattered was they'd survived, and more than that, they'd found something worth fighting for. "No more secrets," Mary said quietly. "I want to know everything Kansas, the war, all of it." James nodded. You deserve that, but it's not a pretty story. Neither is mine, but our past doesn't define our future. He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes serious. What do you see in our future, Mary? She thought about it, about all they'd been through, all they might yet face. I see a life built on truth and trust. I see challenges we'll meet together. I see... She paused, gathering courage. I see love, if you'll have me. James's answer was to pull her close and finally kiss her. It was gentle and fierce at once, a promise and a claiming, a seal on all they'd fought for. When they broke apart, both breathless, James rested his forehead against hers. I love you. Mary Whitfield? God help me. I fought it, but... Don't fight it, she interrupted. We've done enough fighting. Now it's time to live. As if in blessing, an eagle circled overhead, its cry echoing off the mountains. The desert stretched endlessly around them, hard and beautiful and full of possibilities. They had won this battle, but both knew the war might not be over. Webb's partners, Morrison's possible remaining allies. The simple challenges of frontier life all awaited them. But standing together on that porch, hands entwined, hearts finally open, they were ready for whatever came next. The little cabin by the river had become more than a refuge. It had become a home, built not just of logs and mud, but of courage and commitment, of two souls who'd found in each other the strength to face the world. And that, Mary thought as James held her close, was worth any price they might yet have to pay. The doctor arrived just after dawn, his face grave as he examined James's reopened wound. During the firefight, he'd torn the barely healed tissue. An infection had set in with a vengeance. For 3 days now, fever had racked his body, leaving him delirious and weak. Mary hadn't left his side except to fetch water and clean bandages. She bathed his burning skin with cool cloths, spooned broth between his cracked lips, and whispered prayers to any power that might be listening. The strong man who'd protected her had become fragile as glass, and the role reversal terrified her more than any gunfight. The next 24 hours will tell. Doctor, Hartley said, packing his medical bag. If the fever breaks, he'll likely recover. If not... He didn't finish, but Mary heard the words anyway. What can I do? She asked, exhaustion making her voice hoarse. What you've been doing. Keep him cool, get fluids in him when you can, and pray. After the doctor left, Mary returned to her vigil. James tossed restlessly, mumbling fragments of memory. Sometimes he called for men who must have died in the war. Sometimes he spoke to his mother, apologizing for things Mary couldn't understand, and sometimes, heart-wrenchingly, he called for her. Mary, don't go. Not safe. I'm here, she soothed, taking his hand. I'm not going anywhere. His eyes opened briefly, lucid for a moment. If I don't make it... Don't say that. Listen. His grip tightened weakly. There's money hidden, under the floorboard by the stove, enough to get you somewhere safe. Promise me. I promise nothing, except that you're going to get well, Mary said fiercely. You hear me, James Callahan? You don't get to save me and then leave me alone in this world. A ghost of his old smile crossed his face. Stubborn woman. You have no idea. As darkness fell, his fever climbed higher. Mary had seen men die from infection before it was an ugly, painful way to go. The thought of losing James now, after everything they'd survived, was unbearable. She'd only just found him, only just admitted what was in her heart. Around midnight, Sheriff Brennan arrived with supplies and news. Webb's associates back east are making noise, he reported, threatening legal action, saying Webb was murdered. He was shot while attempting murder himself. Mary replied without taking her eyes off James. 100 witnesses saw it. I know that, and any honest judge would too. But these men have money and influence. They're not used to being denied. Brennan studied James's pallor. "How is he?" "Fighting," Mary said simply. "Like always." Brennan squeezed her shoulder. "If anyone can pull through, it's him. Man's too ornery to die." After he left, Mary found herself talking to James, needing to fill the silence with something besides labored breathing and her own fears. "You want to know something foolish?" she said softly. "That first day, when I saw you in the river, my first thought wasn't fear. It was that you looked like something out of a story, like a knight from those old tales my mother used to tell. Scarred and weathered, but noble." She laughed shakily. "I know. It's silly. You're no knight, and I'm certainly no princess. We're just two broken people trying to survive in a hard world, but maybe that's better than a fairy tale. Maybe that's more real." James stirred, his hand finding hers even in delirium. Mary squeezed gently, continuing her one-sided conversation. "I never told you about my mother, did I? She was beautiful, not just pretty, but truly beautiful. She could have married well, but she fell for my father instead. He was a dreamer, always talking about the fortune he'd make in the goldfields or the perfect farm he'd build out west." She wiped sweat from James's brow, remembering. She followed him from dream to failed dream, never complaining, even when he started drinking, even when the money ran out. She loved him. I used to think she was weak for that. Now I understand. Love isn't weak, it's the strongest thing there is. It's what makes us fight when logic says to run. The candle burned low as she talked about her childhood, about learning to read from her mother's precious books, about watching her father come home from the war a changed man. She talked about the fear that had ruled her life for so long, and how James had helped her find courage she didn't know she possessed. "You saved me," she whispered, "not just from Webb or Samuel, but from the prison I'd built in my own mind. You showed me I could be more than a victim. And now I need you to fight, because I can't imagine facing tomorrow without you." As dawn approached, Mary dozed fitfully in her chair. She woke to a strange sound silence. James's labored breathing had stopped. Heart pounding. She leaned close, terrified of what she'd find. But his chest still rose and fell, and when she touched his forehead, it was cool. The fever had broken. "Thank God," she breathed, tears of relief streaming down her face. James's eyes fluttered open, clear and aware for the first time in days. "Mary." "I'm here." She couldn't stop crying. "You came back." "Couldn't leave," he murmured. "Heard you talking. You're wrong, you know." "About what?" "You are a princess, my princess, and I'll be whatever you need, knight, protector, or just a man who loves you." Mary kissed him then, salt tears mixing with the sweetness of reprieve. When they parted, she saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. "I thought I'd lost you," she admitted. "Going to take more than a fever to get rid of me." His attempt at levity faltered. "Mary, what you did during the attack, you saved us all. You've become so strong." "I had a good teacher." "No," James said seriously. "That courage was always in you. I just helped you find it." Over the following days, James grew stronger. Mary fed him broth and bread, supported him for short walks around the cabin, and marveled at the resilience of the human body and spirit. The attack had left its marks new scars to join the old, but they'd survived. Sheriff Brennan visited regularly with updates. Samuel Briggs had been sentenced to 5 years for attempted trafficking. Marshal Morrison, recovered from his wound, had returned east with a very different report than Webb's associates had hoped for. The immediate dangers seemed past, though they all knew it might not last. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, James grew thoughtful. "This life, it's not easy. There'll always be some ghost from the past or new trouble brewing. You could still leave. Find somewhere peaceful." "James Callahan," Mary interrupted. "If you try to send me away for my own good one more time, I'll shoot you myself." He chuckled. Just making sure you know what you're choosing. I'm choosing you. She said simply, I'm choosing us. Whatever comes, we face it together. James pulled her close, and they watched the desert transform in the dying light. The landscape that had once seemed harsh and forbidding now felt like home, their hard-won sanctuary. I never expected this, James said quietly. Never thought I'd find peace, much less love. Life surprises us sometimes, Mary agreed, not always with pain. A coyote called in the distance, its voice soon joined by others in their evening chorus. Once that sound had frightened her. Now it was just part of the desert's music, wild and free. There's something I need to ask, James said, shifting to face her. I know it's not conventional, and we've not known each other long by most standards. But when you face death together, time seems less important than truth. Mary's heart began to race. What are you asking? I'm asking if you'd consider making this permanent, not just staying here, but... He paused, vulnerability clear in his eyes. Being my wife, building a real life together. The proposal was simple, without flourish or grand gestures, but it was real and honest, like everything between them. Nothing would make me happier, Mary said, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, James, 1,000 times yes. He kissed her then, sealing the promise as stars began to appear overhead. They had no ring, no fancy ceremony planned, no dowry or social standing, but they had something more valuable: trust forged in fire, love tested by trials, and the courage to claim happiness despite the odds. We'll need to find a preacher, James said practically, though his eyes sparkled with joy. Brennan mentioned there's one coming through town next week, Mary replied. If you can wait that long. I've waited my whole life for you. Another week won't kill me. He paused, though it might come close. They laughed together, the sound carrying across the desert, inside the cabin. Dishes needed washing and chores awaited tomorrow's attention. Beyond their small holding, the world churned on with its conflicts and complications. But for this moment, they had each other and the promise of a shared future. Mary thought about the frightened girl who'd fled into the desert just weeks ago, running from one nightmare with no dream of something better. That girl could never have imagined this safety, purpose, and love with a man who saw her strength even when she couldn't. No regrets, James asked, reading her thoughtful expression. None, Mary said firmly. For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I want to be. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, Mary felt the truth of those words in her bones. The journey had been hard, the cost nearly unbearable, but it had led her here, to this man and this moment and this choice to face whatever came next together. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There were repairs to finish, a ranch to run, and the ever-present possibility of new threats. But there would also be shared mornings over coffee, evenings reading by lamplight, and the quiet joy of building something lasting with their own hands. I love you, she said, needing to voice what had lived unspoken in her heart. And I love you, James replied, more than I have words for. They stayed on the porch until full dark, planning their simple future and marveling at the unexpected gifts life could bring. The desert stretched endless around them, but it no longer seemed empty. It was full of possibility, of hope, of the promise that two people who'd been broken by the world could build something whole together. And in that small cabin by the river, where a frightened girl had found sanctuary and a lonely man had rediscovered his heart, love took root as surely as any desert flower, hardy, resilient, and blooming despite the odds. The preacher arrived on Tuesday, dusty from the trail and eager to perform what he called the Lord's work in this wilderness. Word had spread through the scattered homesteads, and by Thursday morning, neighbors Mary had never met were arriving at the cabin bearing gifts: a quilt from the Baxter family, preserves from old Mrs. Henderson, and even a bottle of good whiskey from Sheriff Brennan. for medicinal purposes. Mary wore her mother's dress, carefully mended and pressed. It wasn't white ivory, had long since given way to practical tan, but James looked at her like she wore the finest silk. He'd managed to find a proper suit somewhere, though it pulled tight across his shoulders, and he tugged at the collar like a man unused to such formality. "You clean up nice, Callahan," Brennan said, standing as James's witness. "Feel like a dressed-up mule," James muttered, but his eyes never left Mary. The ceremony was simple, held in the shade of the cottonwoods by the river where they'd first met. The preacher spoke of commitment and courage, of building something lasting in a temporary world. Mary barely heard the words. All her attention was on James, the way sunlight caught the silver in his hair, the steady warmth of his hands holding hers, the promise in his storm-gray eyes. "Do you, Mary Whitfield, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" "I do," she said, voice clear and certain. When James echoed those words, his voice rougher with emotion, Mary felt something settle deep in her chest. All her life she'd been running, searching, surviving. Now, finally, she was home. "By the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, I pronounce you man and wife." The preacher declared, "You may kiss your bride." The kiss was tender and brief, mindful of their audience, but it sealed something profound. When they parted, Mary saw her own joy reflected in the faces around them, people who'd come to celebrate love in a hard land where such victories were precious. The reception was frontier style, tables made of planks and sawhorses groaning under the weight of shared food. Someone had brought a fiddle, and soon music filled the air. Mary danced with her new husband, laughing as he proved surprisingly graceful despite his protests of ignorance. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked as he spun her expertly. "Officer's training," he admitted. "Lot of good it did me in the war, but at least I can waltz with my wife without stepping on her feet." "My wife." The words sent a thrill through Mary every time she heard them. As the sun began to sink, guests started taking their leave. Each departure came with advice. Some practical, plant your corn after the last frost. Some cryptic, never go to bed angry or with dirty dishes. And some that made Mary blush despite her best efforts. Finally, they were alone. The cabin felt different somehow, not just shelter now, but truly home. Mary busied herself with clearing dishes, suddenly nervous despite everything they'd been through together. James caught her hands, stilling their movement. "Leave them. We've got the rest of our lives for chores." He led her to the porch where they'd spent so many evenings. The desert was painting itself in shades of rose and gold, and somewhere a mockingbird was running through its repertoire. "No regrets?" Mary asked, echoing his question from days before. "Only one," James said seriously. When she looked alarmed, he smiled. "That I didn't meet you sooner." They sat in comfortable silence, watching night claim the desert. Then James cleared his throat. "I have something for you. It's not much." He produced a small leather pouch. Inside was a ring, simple silver set with a piece of turquoise the color of winter sky. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "One of the few things I kept from the old life. I know it's not fancy." "It's perfect," Mary interrupted, tears pricking her eyes as he slipped it onto her finger. The metal was warm, worn smooth by years, and it fit as if made for her. "She would have liked you," James said. "She had your strength, your way of finding light in dark places." They moved inside as full dark fell. The cabin had been transformed by the neighbor women, fresh flowers on the table, new curtains at the windows, and the bed made up with a gifted quilt. It was still simple, still frontier rough, but it was theirs. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Mary traced the scars on James's chest, each one a story of survival, of a life hard-lived before they'd found each other. "We did it," she said softly. "We're free." "Free," James agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "It's a good word. Better when it's shared." Dawn came gently, painting the room in soft light. Mary woke to find James already awake, watching her with an expression of wonder. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Just thinking how lucky I am. A few months ago, I was ready to grow old alone out here. Now I have a wife, a future, a reason to build something lasting." "We both got lucky," Mary corrected. "Or maybe it wasn't luck at all. Maybe some things are meant to be." They rose and made breakfast together, moving around each other with easy familiarity. The chores that had once been solitary were shared, now feeding chickens, tending the garden, checking the fence lines. Everything felt different when done together, transformed from mere survival into the rhythm of a life being built. 3 days into their married life, a letter arrived. Sheriff Brennan delivered it personally, his face grave. "It's from a law firm back east," he said, "addressed to Mrs. Mary Callahan." Mary's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The language was dense with legal terms, but the meaning was clear. Webb's associates were claiming she owed them money for breach of contract and damages to their legitimate business interests. "Vultures!" James spat. "They can't let it go." But Mary surprised them both by laughing. "Let them come. Let them bring their lawyers and their papers. I'm not the scared girl who ran into the desert anymore." She looked at James, then Brennan. "I'm Mary Callahan now, and I know my rights. More importantly, I know my worth, and it's not measured in dollars or contracts." Brennan grinned. "That's the spirit. I'll wire the territorial governor. Make sure he knows what kind of legitimate business these men are really in." After the sheriff left, Mary burned the letter in the stove, watching the threats turn to ash. "You've changed," James observed. "We both have," Mary replied, "for the better." The weeks that followed brought the normal challenges of frontier life, a storm that damaged the chicken coop, a mountain cat that stalked their cattle, the constant work of wresting a living from unforgiving land. But they faced each challenge together, and what had once seemed impossible alone became manageable shared. One evening, as summer gave way to autumn, they sat watching the sunset from their porch. The desert was beginning its seasonal transformation, painting itself in subtle golds and browns. "I've been thinking," Mary said, "about the future. Oh, this place, it could be more than just a ranch. We have water, good land. We could build something here, a real community maybe, a place where people like us, people looking for a second chance, could start over." James considered this. "It's a big dream." "I'm not afraid of big dreams anymore," Mary said firmly. "Are you?" He smiled, pulling her close. "Not with you beside me." As stars began to appear overhead, they talked about possibilities, expanding the house, bringing in more cattle, maybe even starting a school one day. Dreams that would have seemed foolish to the lonely gunfighter and the desperate girl who'd met by the river were now plans to be carefully built, step by step. "You know what I realized?" James said as they prepared for bed. "That first day, when I saw you by the river, I wasn't just finding you. I was finding the life I was meant to live." Mary kissed him softly. "We found each other, and in this hard land, that's miracle enough." Outside, the desert sang its nighttime chorus, coyotes and owls and the whisper of wind through sage. Inside, two people who'd been broken by the world continued the patient work of building something whole. Not just a marriage, but a testament to the power of choice, of courage, of love that grows stronger for being tested. They'd traveled hard roads to reach this place, this moment, this quiet joy. And while they knew more challenges would come, Webb's associates might not give up easily. Drought or disease could threaten their growing prosperity. The simple dangers of frontier life were ever present, They also knew they'd face them as they'd learned to face everything together. In the morning, there would be work to do, fences to mend, crops to tend, a life to build piece by piece. But for now, they had each other, their small cabin by the river, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with running away, but with choosing to stay. The virgin who'd spied him bathing in the river had become a wife, a partner, a woman who knew her own strength. The lonely gunfighter had become a husband, a protector not just of body, but of dreams. And in the vast wilderness of the American frontier, they'd carved out their own small paradise defended by courage, sustained by love, and blessed by the freedom they'd fought so hard to claim. Their story would continue tomorrow and all the tomorrows after. But this chapter, the chapter of finding and choosing and beginning, was complete. And it was good. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this tale, whether you're listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps even somewhere in the great American West. Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know what you think of Mary and James's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more tales of love, courage, and adventure in the Old West. Don't forget to like this video and hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of the frontier. Your support means the world and helps keep these tales alive. Until next time, partners.